Hello and welcome. Welcome to Litquake 2020. Yes, there is indeed a Litquake 2020. We are San Francisco's literary festival, and tonight's event is a conversation with Lysley Tenorio and Daniel Handler, and it's being co-presented by our friends at the Philippine American Writers and Artists Foundation and KALW 91.7. I am Jane Ganal. I'm the co-founder of Litquake. And this 21st year, we are all virtual, streaming from the Bay Area and elsewhere to points all around the world through October 24th. In fact, this is our 8th night and we have 8 to go. So we are officially at the halfway point. We at Litquake would like to think that the unbearable stresses of this year means that our mission of bringing connection, humanity, and inspiration to our audiences might be a little more critical than normal. So if you're so inclined, we would welcome your donation at Venmo, PayPal, or at litquake.org. We also want to thank everyone in the literary community who has helped us with this year's festival. Every year we have dozens and dozens of partners, and this year is no exception. We also want to thank our staff, our donors, our board, and even those who bought a Jeopardy Litquake. As always, this is a group effort, and we are very grateful. Before I introduce Lysley and Daniel, there are a few housekeeping notes. If you think of a question during the event, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We won't be able to get to all the questions, most likely, but we can answer a few toward the end. And after the event, you'll be emailed and asked to fill out a short survey. We hope you will do this because these surveys are critical to our future fundraising efforts. It tells us who our audience is. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest updates and get our entire schedule at litquake.org. And you can buy Daniel and Lysley's latest books from your favorite independent bookstore or find our Litquake bookshelf at bookshop.org. So, speaking of books, Lysley's new book, The Son of Good Fortune, is a big-hearted debut novel following an undocumented Filipino son as he navigates his relationship with his mother, an extremely uncertain future, and the place that he calls home. The New York Times recently called it an affecting portrayal of just how potently a parent can shape the expectations of their child. And USA Today called Lysley a gifted, expressive writer about the Filipino-American diaspora. He's also the author of the short story collection Monstrous, which was named a Book of the Year by the Chronicle and adapted for the stage by ACT. He's the recipient of an NEA Fellowship, a Whiting Award, Stegner Fellowship, and many more. Born in the Philippines, he lives in San Francisco and is a professor at St. Mary's. He will be in conversation tonight, lucky man, with Daniel Handler. And just a note to say, one of the reasons we chose Daniel or asked Daniel tonight was because when Lysley appeared previously at Litquake, it was with a huge martini glass. And we thought, who would he be good to be in conversation with? And we, of course, immediately thought of Daniel, who is the city's bon vivant. Daniel is the author of 7 novels, most recently Bottle Grove, which was published by Bloomsbury a year ago and garnered this rave from Esquire magazine. With this dark, timely comedy, Handler continues to prove himself a writer of prodigious gifts. I think I would put that on a business card. And as Lemony Snicket, his books have sold more than 70 million copies in 40 languages and have been adapted for screen and stage. The first season of Netflix's adaptation of A Series of Unfortunate Events, for which he served as executive producer, garnered a 2018 Peabody Award. He lives in San Francisco with Lisa Brown, the very gifted illustrator, to whom he is married and with whom he has collaborated on several books and one son and many, many cocktails. So please welcome Lysley and Daniel. Take it away.
Hello.
Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. It's good to see you. Congratulations on your book, which is extremely exciting.
Thank you very much.
I want everyone in the audience to be as excited about it as I am. I think it is a novel. It's been wonderful to see the praise that it is getting, but in some ways I think it has this, the praise has so much respect and such about your very serious intent, which is great. But I think that there's something so lively and light-footed about this book. And for people who are, as all of us are, I think, consumed by so many of the serious issues of today and so much of the pain and the suffering that is going on, will find this to be both very observant about that, but also a delight to read, a happy delight to read. And I hope people pick it up. I know it's been a long time coming, this book.
8, 9 years, something like that. When was the
Yeah.
last, like 1978? Is that when the last book came out? Something like that. I was 5, you know.
Right. No, of course. Yeah, I was before I was born, of course.
Right.
But and tell me about that. Tell me about that journey of, because I mean, first novels are always 10 kinds of adventures for people, I think.
Right. So the first book was a collection of stories, and that's really how I got to writing. I fell in love with the story form, and I liked reading stories, but you know, I owed Echo a novel. That was part of the deal. In an effort to not, you know, face litigation, I finally got it done. But, you know, I quickly realized that the short form was no training ground for the longer. And it took a long time to figure out what this story was really about. In its earliest versions, this was a novel about these sniffer dogs that were trained to sniff out pirated DVDs in the Philippines, and there were these Filipino DVD pirates who were trying to assassinate these dogs, based on a true story. I wrote an entire novel about that story. Fun as it was, ridiculous as it was, I just didn't care about it. All I really cared about was the mother-son relationship, which mostly floated in the background, and that's what I kept. And so I ended up having to build a whole new novel around this mother-son relationship that became the relationship between Excel and Maxima. And that took about 8 or 9 years. You know, life gets in the way and stalls things, but finally got it done. You know, terrible timing in terms of release, but I'm happy it's in the world finally.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's standard now for everyone to say that it's terrible timing for a book to come out right now. And, you know, in many ways it is, but I also feel that everyone's at home, everyone's reading. You know, I feel like there is this conversation that's going on, and that it's true that you don't get to be in like the Denver airport hoping that your plane won't be so late that you'll miss your event. So there's that. But I think it's really, I think it's kind of an interesting literary time as far as I'm concerned. For people who are interested in literature, who are picking up literature, they're spending a lot of time reading it and spending a lot of time thinking about it. And in some ways, the enforced solitude and worry of our current world is kind of what the novel was built for.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, a mother and son relationship, I think particularly kind of, well, I mean, how can a mother and son relationship not be intergenerational, I guess is what I was about to say. But that it's such a stalwart of certain kinds of immigrant novels. You know, my father emigrated here, and so there's a whole swath of Jewish novels about the immigration experience. And I really love how yours does not fall into any of the kind of boring pitfalls of so many of those books. It's not about the old country and the new country. It's about kind of how you can't get the old country out of the new country and vice versa, it seems to me. And was that, I guess what I'm asking is, were you drawn to some of these cliches? Were you drawn to some of these pitfalls when you were thinking about it? Or was it easy for you to avoid that?
Yeah, I actually think I was responding to some of those tropes. I think in particular, the story of Maxima. So for those who don't know the novel, it's the story about an undocumented Filipino son and his mother, and they live in Colma, right outside San Francisco. And Maxima, his mother, is a former B-action movie star in the Philippines turned online scam artist. She dupes unwitting American men into falling in love with her and wiring her money. You know, I think a
It could
familiar
happen to anyone, by the way. That could happen to anyone. I just want to say that up front.
I assume it'll happen to me tomorrow, you know?
Yeah.
So remember me well, everybody. I definitely think I was responding to this very familiar character in a lot of immigrant narratives, which is the kind of strong yet very reserved immigrant mother who, you know, internalizes everything and might have a kind of outburst, you know, at a pivotal dramatic moment and finally let everything out. I believe that that figure is true in a lot of people's experiences, but it was really important for me to have a Filipino immigrant mother who is not only psychologically and emotionally strong, but also physically formidable. I mean, she is someone who literally can beat up the average person on the street. She's a trained martial artist. And that was really important to me, to have an immigrant mother in the book who is just so physical and so physically present, and her physicality is just as vital as her emotionality. I feel like that was something I haven't quite seen in a lot of immigrant fiction. And once I really nailed down her character, it felt a little easier to figure out what some of the story was that would be around her. And even the main character, Excel, who is, you know, in comparison, pretty quiet, almost passive by necessity. So I definitely think I was responding to a lot of maybe pitfalls, if you want to say, to what I'd been seeing for so many years now as a reader. And, you know, hopefully it worked.
Well, I certainly did. From my point of view, there's I think I love that she's an action movie star, and then there's something I feel like she's speaking up for the kind of a visceral delight of the world, and that your novel projects so much. There's a part that I marked where they're showing one of her films at a film festival, and there's some kind of highfalutin, ironic, distant professorial commentary that goes on about the movie. And then she says, it's a good movie. And say, given context, it has merits. Like context, it has a heartbreaking story, top quality stunt work, a cathedral explosion, it's drama, it's action, it's life. And I felt like it was like kind of an advertisement for the novel in its own like context. That's not what we're talking about for context. It's like joy. This is what we're doing right here. And
placement in there.
Exactly. Right. Your own blurb in the book. But I was curious, part of when she says that about context was reminding me that of the book zigs and zags kind of backwards and forwards in time in a way that feels impulsive, like memory. Like when you're someplace and you remember something else and then you kind of shoot over there and you remember that, and that's what it feels like. And I was wondering if there was is there kind of a time structure that I was missing, where that you were secretly had this all planned out, or was this in fact kind of born out of impulse?
I think it was born out of, I think, just resignation, actually. I was so reluctant to have the back and forth, you know, jumping back in time. Every time I do a transition into flashback or backstory, I start thinking of the Wayne's World, you know, right, where you know, the screen goes blurry and we're in the past. And I had actually tried to compress the Hello City storyline, which is like the past story, into like a single long chapter, and it just wasn't working. And I realized there was a full story, you know, in its own right in that backstory. So once I settled into realizing, okay, I just got to go back and forth between these timelines and hopefully they converge somehow. A lot of that was just being okay with that construction, but also hoping that the reader, once acclimated to that pattern, would sort of go along with it. And to be okay with these transitions of, you know, 9 months earlier, a dark right. September morning, things like that. Which seems so gestural, but I think, you know, hopefully a reader will just go along with it and stick to the story.
I mean, it felt very deft to me, and also because I guess the way that the kind of conflicts and ruminations of the novel are not dependent on what moment we're in, which is of course just like life. Like if you have an issue with your mom, you didn't have it in 1 year and not in the next year. Right. And I'd like to say hello in case my mother's watching tonight. And but that I loved that you could agree to let go of kind of your own anxiety about keeping everything in order. And I must admit, from someone, there's few things, I hate to turn a page and then it says like, Chapter 2, 1981. And you have to go back to, you're like, but I didn't know what year was before. And you got to go back. You know, I've always said to students, like, no one knows what part 1 of your novel is called. Because when you get to part 2, you know, and it's like a river runs through it, and then you're like, oh, what was part 1 again? And then you got to go back. So I like that you abandon that. It's so, I'm so envious of writers like yourself who have taken a long time to produce something that feels so effortless. Like if you'd written this book in 3 months, I would have been like, well, that makes sense because it was all just unraveling from his brain. But to know that it's just kind of effervescence is in fact the result of serious work makes me envious and resentful. That wasn't really a question.
I wouldn't envy taking 8 or 9 years to write a book. I'd much rather write it in a few months, but alas.
So you mentioned Hello City, and I want to talk about it because I thought that was a wondrous kind of invention. So there's some time spent in this kind of quasi-anarchist collaborative community called Hello City that had both, I thought it like bumped up very nicely between, it feels like I was like, I think I've been there. I think I've driven through there. And I think I had a friend who lived there for a while, but also clearly I was like, no one's ever thought of this before. It's a whole new imaginary thing. Where did that come from? Was that linked to something in your head?
So I knew, you know, early on, I remember back in 2012 when I was working on this novel, I knew that part of it was taking place in Colma, and I needed a place that really contrasted Colma. So right. Colma, for those who don't know, is this little town right outside San Francisco that's probably most famous for its 17 cemeteries. You cannot get buried in San Francisco. If you want to get buried, you go to Colma, where the dead literally outnumber the living. And that seemed to be a good kind of place for this undocumented mother and son to live. I knew that Excel needed to have escaped for a while, and I thought, what would be a perfect contrast to that? It would probably be somewhere where he can live openly and freely. And so I thought, you know, maybe there's some sort of off-the-grid community that I can create. And so I just did a lot of research on off-the-grid communities, and I found a place called Slab City in Southern California, which is this off-the-grid community that's pretty much left alone, and you know, old hippies live there, drug addicts, former tech people, and the slabs are
I think that's a redundant list, but go on.
That's right. Oh, so redundant. The slabs are the remnants of like a military base that it was supposed to become. And I kind of just riffed on that. And I thought, well, instead of slabs, what if they were helipads? And I love the idea of these circles dotting the desert landscape with an H on them. And I just sort of took it from there. I watched a lot of YouTube videos about Slab City, but certainly took a lot of liberties.
Yeah, there's something, I've never seen this nailed, but I think there's something about the kind of ad hoc communities or alternate ideas for communities that that feels very Californian, and that you link that pretty explicitly to the immigrant experience, right? To the experience of living, whether you live in a, you know, in a certain cultural community that is kind of its own world. I mean, sometimes it's seen in a positive way in its own kind of multicultural bubble, and sometimes it's seen like a ghetto in another way. But and that also to link that to these kind of communities that are linked by ideals just felt like a beautiful moment to think about being in California and immigration. There's so much politics I'm seeing in the response to your novel, and there, you know, so much talk that I've seen about the book says like, well, at a time where everyone's panicked about immigrants, where everyone's like screaming about immigrants, this novel comes, and it seems to me that there's so many writers of color and immigrant writers who are being saddled with this expectation of taking on these enormous issues, you know, that somehow your novel has to be the answer to these like 1,000 screamed and tweeted questions that are like racing through our crumbling republic. And did you feel that pressure? Did you feel that you were obliged to make this novel respond to our kind of national moment about immigration?
I did. I thought about that a lot, and I was very, very nervous in many ways about this book. For one thing, you know, whenever you're a writer or any kind of artist who is part of any kind of minority group, there's this automatic expectation put upon your work. I remember when my book of stories, Monsters, came out, I read a review, which was kind of a bad review, which I don't mind, you know, at least they read it. But the reason it was a bad review was because this reviewer said that the stories seemed generic. And the reason she felt the stories were generic was because she read the book but came away not knowing really what it meant to be Filipino. And I thought, these are 8 stories about people who beat up the Beatles, a romance in a leper colony, you know, the making of a really bad monster sci-fi movie.
That's my favorite story, by the way.
How are these stories supposed to teach anybody about what it means to be Filipino? And it just seemed like a really unfair expectation. So thinking about that, and then factoring into the fact that this book also deals with undocumented immigration, I really did worry about the implications of whatever decision some of these characters might make. I mean, toward the end of the novel, I don't know, maybe spoiler alert, certain characters have to deliberate, do they stay in America or do they go back to their original countries? The implications of an immigrant deciding to go back are politically fraught. You know, we're in a climate where so many people are anti-immigrant, and the response is go back home. So to have a character who might do that, you know, I worry about the risk of someone thinking, oh, this book is sort of a proponent of sending the immigrants back. That's not what it is. But I also want to stay true to the situations of these individual characters. And for some of these characters, it may not pay off to be in the country, to be in the States anymore. So at a certain point, I had to stop doing all the research about DACA and the Dreamers and undocumented immigration and just commit to what the stories were of these particular individuals. Once I just clung to that idea, stick to the story, stick to the characters, it became a little easier to write. But I was very, very nervous when this book came out because of the conversation that you're talking about.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think the story inhabits the issue of undocumented immigration in a way that feels very, very genuine. You know, there's nothing. You can't see it being made into a crappy movie where they've shoehorned Matt Damon as the noble lawyer helping everybody out or something like that.
But I was just talking to Matt Damon today, and he's all set.
Well, I mean, you know, I know you live in San Francisco, so whatever you got to do to pay the rent is fine with me. But I think that the story, I mean, there've been some crappy and controversial novels about immigration and undocumented people that have kind of been part of a tedious literary argument, it seems to me, in recent days. And I was so appreciative of a novel that didn't look away from what was happening, but also was not, it's not a polemic by any means. I mean, you feel strongest, I think, about the mother and the son and what's going to happen to them, and that their position, their citizenship and their position in the country is just one of a host of things that are car crashing together in their times. And that just felt like a beautiful moment to me. I'm quoting from your loving review in the Times recently that says, Tenorio's insistence on the specificity of his characters' dreams and longings is its own kind of argument for their right to be here. And I thought that was like a very beautiful summation of how your novel presents the specificity of people's experiences to make us help to, and how can we not think of all the specificities that are going on, and how difficult it is, and to to speak of it and to work it out, and how impossible and monstrous it is to try to lump something together into one large characteristic of people or one large dismissal.
Right.
I was curious about if you ever thought of anywhere else to set this book than in California. It seems so deeply Californian to me, and you're part of a host of Californian writers who we're all proud to call you. And I was wondering if you felt regional in that way.
California just seemed right. You know, I mean, obviously there's a very large Filipino population in the Bay Area, Southern California. So in many ways, it made sense. But Colma for me was the thing that really got the story started. Once I realized, what if, you know, I could actually set part of this novel in Colma. I just thought there was so much to do with that setting. And I did a lot of driving around Colma. I don't know how many times I drove through those cemeteries, past the car dealerships, the two Targets across the street or across the freeway from each other. And that restaurant that Excel works at, the Pie Who Loved Me, there was a place that's based on an actual place that I don't think exists anymore, by the Target in Serramonte. It was full of these creepy animatronic dolls or mannequins or whatever. There's so much in Colma to work with that I thought, I think I can do something with this. You know, it may not have the sort of pulsing life that San Francisco does, but it has its own kind of pulse, and I just had to kind of find it. And once I did, I thought, this feels right. Just keep going.
I think there's something, there's some kind of weird old magic in Serramonte and weird restaurants. There's something there. There's been like generations of crazy restaurants in Serramonte. When I grew up, we would go down there to Farrell's, which was like the old ice cream parlor, and you would wait till one of your friends went to the bathroom, and then you'd tell the restaurant that it was their birthday, and so all this crazy stuff would happen to your increasingly paranoid friends. And then I spent at least one of my childhood birthdays at Pizza and Pipes, which was a pizza place that also had a pipe organ. And so you could write down a song that you wanted the guy to play on a pipe organ. And I just even when I was little, I thought, like, Pizza and Pipes? Is there like a joke I'm missing there? Like, what? Or you just had a pipe organ? Like, what is there's no logic to this place whatsoever.
Oh, I wish it still existed.
Yeah. And, you know, well, you'll never guess what, but it turns out they're not all really great business ideas. But I've always been puzzled by, like, there's a few, you know, it's almost like there's some old crappy restaurant burial ground there. You know, it's like 3,000 years ago, there was an ancient, terrible restaurant, and it just keeps on going and going and going. So I was happy to see the Pie Who Loved Me. I was like, I didn't know that place, but like, I knew where you were.
I'm glad.
So this is a specific question, but I'm a nerd that way. You have a shout out to a writer that I never heard of in your epigraph, which I liked. It says, "Dynamite is loyal to the one who lights the fuse." And it's Dean F. Wilson's novel, Skyshaker, which I had to go and look up. I'd never heard of Dean F. Wilson. And he's like it seems quite popular. So apologies to Mr. Wilson for not having previously known of him, but like a deep sci-fi kind of cyberpunk dude. Is that tell me about that. Like, where'd you find that?
I'm embarrassed to say I went on Google and typed in quotes about dynamite. Oh, that's terrible. Many thanks to Mr. Wilson, but I don't know the book, but I found the quote, and it just seemed so right for this novel.
Yeah, no, it's I'll say it again for people to hear it again. It's dynamite is loyal to the one who lights the fuse. And I felt like if you told me that was like Mussolini, I would have believed you. You know, it has something about like the angry politician's perfect poetic justice. And then I was like, who's Dean F. Wilson? I don't think he was a fascist leader, and he isn't, not yet.
Hopefully
we
not.
all get our turn.
Right.
But he hasn't had his yet. So now that you have written this book, do you feel more aligned to the novel form or more aligned to the short story form? What team are you on?
It's funny. I'm really antsy to write a short story again, and it's been so long since I've written a short story. I'm wondering, do I still remember how to write one? But what I tend to conceive of in my head now are stories that feel more appropriate to, I think, to the longer form. And I think it's because once I stopped expecting this degree of perfection in the way I think the short story operates. With a short story, you can it's meant to be read in one sitting ideally, and as the short story writer, you can hold everything in your head all at once. The fact that I realized I don't have to do that with a novel. It's such a forgiving form. I can have a chapter that meanders, and I may not know exactly what it does for the book, but if it feels right, it's a go. Part of me likes that freedom. And so I've been thinking more about some possible novel ideas, but I would really love to write a story again. I love the short story. It's what made me become a writer.
Yeah, I like that you note that it's all kind of designed to be read in one sitting. There's something that Lori Moore said, actually, I think at a Litquake event, she and I were sharing a stage, and she said that kind of counterintuitively, that short stories are for people with longer attention spans. Because the novel, you can read like a page and a half before bed for 200 nights in a row.
Yes, absolutely.
But a short story, if you don't finish a short story like that night, you have to have a particular kind of love or obsessiveness to decide that you're going to finish it. You're more likely to be like, okay, moving on.
Right. Right. You live with a novel, but with a short story, it's like, you hope it's just one very excellent date.
Yeah.
The novel is like this long relationship.
Yeah. Somebody said once to me that a novel was like kissing a stranger at a party, and a short story is like kissing a stranger at a party, and a novel is like a whole relationship. And it really helped me because I was always the guy who like called the person the next day. I was like, hey, remember we met out at a party? Shouldn't we have lunch or something? And they'd be like, nope. That's not what we do, handler.
Well, I'm heading into 16 years in my relationship here, so maybe that's why I'm anxious to get back to the short story.
There you go. Plus, who doesn't want to go to a party now?
Right.
Oh, so speaking of which, I've been keeping meaning to make it. So I designed a cocktail. This is more fun on stage. It's very difficult to do it virtually, but I assume everybody has the exact same cocktail ingredients that I have at home right now, easily accessible. So everyone do it along with me. I'll give you a second. Obviously, you've already had a sugar cube soaked in brandy at the bottom of it. And then I was looking at there's quite a wacky Filipino cocktail tradition, which has all kinds of things that I could not get at a moment's notice. But then I am putting 2 jiggers of rum, which I'm excited about, and the juice of 1 lime.
Sounds very healthy.
Yeah, it's super healthy. Yeah, this is, you might as well, be having a handful of kale.
Right. That would be a good garnish.
Yeah, that's for Berkeley. When you become a Berkeley novelist, it'll do that. And I'm putting a little bit of coconut milk from a cute little picture that looks like a chicken.
Wow.
And a shot of espresso because it's like California. I tried it this afternoon. I had some testing this afternoon. It's quite delicious.
Did you name it?
Well, normally for such events, I like to build a cocktail kind of around the novel. I felt this was like action, drama. There's nothing specific to it, and it's not very Filipino really. But I felt like the Son of Good Fortune seems like a complicated name for a cocktail. Like, I think it's a really great name for a novel. It rolls off the tongue. And so then I was like, well, maybe I should call it Monstress because that's, you and I first met and you very kindly signed a copy of Monstress for me. But then I just thought we should just call it the Tenorio.
Hey, I like that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Cheers to everyone. I'm sure you've all made your Tenorios at home. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Certainly.
It's better than a Pulitzer to have a cocktail named after you. My God.
The Pulitzer comes and goes, whereas a drink lasts forever. Oh, wait.
I don't know how my obituary is going to begin.
So you've been at St. Mary's for quite some time. Is that right?
Yeah, about 50 years, I think.
Yeah.
Since 2003.
Yeah, that was 50 years ago for sure. And I'm always, St. Mary's seems like a lovely institution. I know quite a few people who've taught there for a while, and it seems like a quite a kind of stable institution, and it seems relatively free of the drama that seems to plague so many other places where people are learning writing. But I know there are a lot of people who are interested in writing who come to these Litquake events, and I was curious about how you think your teaching and your work relate to one another. I'm always curious about that as someone who doesn't really teach very often at all. I'm curious about how encouraging other people and reading other people's work, does that hinder your craft? Do you think that's a blessing? Are those two independent things to you? How does that go?
I think that the great thing about teaching is that it kind of keeps me on my toes. Meaning that, you know, when we're talking about a story, let's say in the graduate fiction workshop, you know, I'm really trying to treat each story and hoping that my students treat each story sort of as its own act of self-invention. So that, you know, while we have traditions and conventions to draw upon when writing, critiquing work, I really want every piece to be to be something unto itself. And I think when I try to work with that within that context or teach within that context, it's sort of, I feel like it sort of frees me up a little bit with my own work, and that I can sort of, you know, lift the burdens of certain expectations and just remember that the story that I'm writing or the book that I'm writing, ultimately, whatever it is I'm working on it'll teach me how to write itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think I think that practice is something that really comes from teaching. I mean, certainly we'll turn to, you know, old advice, old wise advice when reading one another's work. But this idea of, you know, let everything be its own thing and try to read and try to critique within the context of what you think a writer's trying to do has been really, really helpful. And it's also, teaching is also the thing that forces me to try to keep up with what is being published and what's out there. Of course, like all teachers, I have my standbys, but I'm trying really hard to read new work, and I'm trying to teach work by writers who are putting out their first books or don't even have a book. If I can find a really great story in a literary magazine and introduce this writer to my students, you know, hopefully that brings attention to this new writer who would love to have some readers too. So it's very helpful. Of course, it takes up a lot of time. You know, that's just the reality of the situation. You know, thank God for winter and summer breaks.
And I guess to that point, one of the things that was kind of freeing about reading your novel was that it did not feel beholden to me to any particular kind of tradition. We've talked a little bit about how it kind of kicks at some of the slats of the immigrant novel, but were there books that felt like touchstones to you in this?
You know, a book that's always been really important to me is Native Speaker by Chang-Rae Lee. He was also my teacher. I'm also his occasional dog sitter. So, you know, it's really great to love a book, but also to really be fond of the writer as a person. So Native Speaker was one of those books that really jumps back and forth in time a lot. And in fact, jumps to the present tense later in the novel, which is pretty audacious. I didn't take those kinds of leaps, but sort of holding on to that book. I wrote a lot of this book at residencies, you know, sort of all over. And that was one of those books that I sort of made sure I had with me, just to kind of reference it or to even have it as like a kind of good luck charm. So Native Speaker, and you know, a Native Speaker is kind of a landmark in immigrant fiction because on the surface, it's kind of like a spy novel. Not the traditional kind of spy novel, but it is a book about a spy. But beneath that veneer is, you know, an immigrant story. And I think that's what I was trying to do with this book as well. On its surface, here's a scam artist, here's a B-action movie star, here's this wayward kid who works at the pie who loved me. But beneath that, it's an immigrant story for sure. And I think Chang-Rae's book was a good example for me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful book. I'm happy to hear it mentioned, and I'm sure available for purchase at your local independent bookstore.
Absolutely.
Right on cue then, as I'm guilting people into buying books, I think it's time to move to a little bit of Q&A. I believe that's being brought to us by our esteemed moderator, Jane Ganal. So we should riff for a couple of minutes while that sets up, I guess. What's your local bookstore?
Green Apple. Green Apple, well, there are 2 Green Apples, or 3 Green Apples because there's the annex, but we live about a 2-minute walk from Green Apple Books on the Park in the Sunset, and they're wonderful. And, you know, I encourage everybody to please buy their books. I mean, from any independent bookstore, but if you are local here, please go to Green Apple. They have done such a good job of not only staying open, but also just being this much needed resource for readers and for writers. They do such a great job of supporting writers and hosting events when they can. I've done a lot of Zoom events at this point, and my only in-person event was an in-store signing that my partner and I got to do. My partner had a book come out recently as well, so we did a signing together, and that was our one in-person event, and I was so grateful for it.
Yeah, they're lovely. It's and walking that little couple blocks of that neighborhood, I live fairly near there. It's one of the things that I miss the most. Like I would go and work at the coffee shop and then go to Green Apple and have a little sushi maybe and like, drink at the fireplace.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of drinking, here's Jane.
Who has not been doing enough of it lately.
Sorry to hear that.
I know.
Gotta get lit.
I'm just coming on to tell the 40 or so people who are watching this to please ask a question. Oh, hold on. One just popped right up there.
Oh.
Hi, Leslie. Beverly Parino here. She is actually on the Litquake committee. Great conversation. Thanks so much. And where did you get that shirt?
Oh, it's jellyfish, right?
It is jellyfish. I'll admit it. I have nothing to lose. It's my partner's shirt. I needed a shirt. Right. He got this, I think, I don't know, Banana Republic or something like that. I needed a shirt. I couldn't find a good shirt. I borrowed his shirt.
I have the Monterey Bay Aquarium jellyfish cam bookmarked on YouTube. It's quite the hypnotic watch when you need that.
Oh, wow. What's it called?
It's just like their live feed and it's been down recently, and I don't know if that's pandemic related, but anyway, it's like a camera that they stuck to the side of a jellyfish tank.
Oh,
and so you just watch it and it's pretty hypnotic.
Cool.
I have a question that I'm curious about that I might as well throw out. And again, folks, please just type a question into the Q&A if you have one. Your new book, Leslie, I feel like it could have been, could still be sort of rewritten. You know how some people will take an existing novel and rewrite it for children, or, I mean, and this is Daniel's world, obviously, but is that something you've thought about doing? Is that something you feel comfortable doing?
You know, I have quite a few students who are writing like YA, and I'm realizing that it takes a very, very particular skill set and a real understanding of the ways to sort of balance, you know, what would be curious for a younger person, but also just as curious for an adult. I don't know that I have that skill set in my mind yet, but the more I work with MFA students who are writing YA novels, the more it makes me think, I don't know, kind of want to give this a shot. I think I read a review somewhere that thought that The Son of Good Fortune was a YA novel. And I actually thought that was kind of cool because I thought, well, if it might appeal to, you know, that specific audience, then maybe this novel has a, I don't know, maybe a kind of appeal that I hadn't thought about before. So, I mean, I think that would be great.
Certainly, these are stories that need to be heard at all age levels, I'm thinking. Okay, we have 3 good questions here. If you had to pick one moment in the novel that was your absolute favorite, what was it and why?
Oh, boy. I think I don't know if it was one of my favorites, but I remember writing it in a moment of real physical exhaustion. At a certain, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing to admit. The very first deadline for this novel with my publisher was 2011. So I had many extensions along the way. And at a certain point, they said, you don't need any more extensions. You can get this done.
Plus, you were holding out for a pandemic release, if I'm not mistaken. You're like, it's done, but like, I don't want it out until there's a huge virus.
The fools, it works. But I remember at a certain point when there were no more extensions, I remember at a certain point, there was like maybe a week or 2 weeks where I was working until about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I would get up at around 6. And as I was trying to do the last revisions before giving it to my publisher, there's a moment at the, spoiler alert, whatever. There's a moment where where Maxima and Excel are at an airport, and he overhears conversations among these passengers, Filipino passengers who are about to go back to fly to visit the Philippines, and he overhears some Tagalog, the translation of which means they sound similar, umuwi and uuwi, if I'm remembering correctly, and the English translations of those terms are going home and coming home, and that he hears those words simultaneously and overlapping. That's a moment that just sort of came to me right then and there. I think it's because I was so physically and kind of emotionally tired. I remember once I got that on the page, I thought, you know, I don't need to revise that particular moment. It's a go. I'm gonna go with it, and it stayed, and my editor liked it, and I think because I was at such a point of exhaustion, and I just got it on the page, kind of serendipitously. That's kind of a favorite moment, I think, for me.
That's great.
I have a favorite moment. Can I say my favorite moment from this novel?
Yes.
It's just a sentence that I think is glorious. I'm going to read it out loud. It's from the end of, I guess it must be chapter 26. He entered the bus station and walked up to the man behind the ticket counter, told him he needed to get home, and asked how to get there. Oh. I just thought that was really beautiful.
Oh,
and I also think like that is for me anyway, I think it must be a universal experience for so many people. Like everyone knows that feeling when you're in a bus station or a train station or an airport, you know, and the person behind the desk is like, okay, next. And you're like, I gotta get home, you know? And what you want is for them to like reach across the counter and take you in their arms and then be like, but your home is right here. Look, we've magically put you there.
Yeah.
You know, and then instead they're like, it's gonna cost you $1,400 and it's not gonna happen till midnight. But but I thought that was it was a beautiful moment, and it's and also it's a and there's so many deft moments in the novel where you do this, I think. Like that is where so many lesser writers there would be a huge dramatic moment, right? Of like, I've decided to go home. Are you sure you want to go home? Yes, I do. I want to go home. In fact, I have a suitcase with me with all of the props from this novel that represent various aspects of the book. I mean, it's not surprising for anyone who was a fan of Monstrous as I was, but you kind of, you know exactly how to tiptoe over those horrendous cliches.
Thank you.
I remember when I first met Daniel, and I had just written a book, and I said it was like 310 pages. I'm sure you don't remember this. And you said, I think any author should be required to take out a permit to write any book longer than 300 pages. It's all about economy of language. And yeah. I know you were kind of joking, but it really stuck with me. It's like, can't you say everything you need to say in 300 pages?
It's not like we shouldn't allow it, because obviously.
Okay, so did you ever find oops, Daniel's talking.
I just said, it's not as if I wouldn't allow people to write a longer novel, because it's like, I'm in favor of the freedom of expression, but I just think maybe you should apply for a permit. You should have to say why it's longer than 300 pages.
Exactly.
And it would be like a gun permit. We would give it to everybody. Just make sure that someone had to fill out something and explain why.
Oh, that's funny. Someone wants to know if you ever find yourself going down the rabbit hole of research for a novel and not spending enough time writing, and how you balance that out.
All the time.
That could apply to either one of you.
Research is so much fun, and it's easy. I can fool myself into thinking it's a valid form of procrastination, but at a certain point, it's not. At a certain point, research can be overwhelming. Your job, which is, as a fiction writer anyway, is to, kind of ultimately create something out of nothing. So at a certain point, you got to let go of the research.
It's true.
Agreed.
Yeah.
D'accord. Let's see, Lysley, I teach some of your stories in my Asian American Studies classes, and everyone loves your stories about the I Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Huge fan of you and your work. I know my students would want to know, how does your new work fit into the tradition of Filipinx American literature, if you feel it does, or with literature in the Philippines?
It's funny. I remember a long time ago, even before my book came out, I read some critical article about Filipino literature, not Filipino American literature, but Filipino literature. And they referenced some of my work, and they said that I wouldn't have an audience in the Philippines, that my work seemed too American. I don't quite know what they meant, but I remember thinking, well, I guess that kind of makes sense, because even though my stories are about Filipinos and Filipino Americans, sometimes they take place in the Philippines, the stories are really much dealing with the American reality. And so much of the stories, even if they're set in a leper colony in the South China Sea, are responses to, the question of America and what America means, and particularly what America has meant to Filipinos. So if it's so rooted in the question of America, it kind of makes sense that my work may not really fall into that tradition. I wouldn't mind if it did, but I understand if some readers think that it doesn't.
I do think novels set in Colma, though, automatically have like a universal appeal.
I hope so. I hope so.
This is sort of almost an adjunct question, but any advice for a white novelist who has created a mother and son Filipino characters? Maybe you could even touch on, how you feel about the controversy about who gets to write fiction and whether it's ever suitable to step outside your own borders, so to speak.
Right. I understand the importance and the complexity of that conversation. And it's important to me that it remains a conversation, that it is not one that is shut down. So in that regard, I'm a writer. That's what I do. And I feel committed to this idea that as a writer or any kind of artist, you should be able to do what you want to do. My hope is that you do it with good intentions and with a good degree of knowledge, and you do it understanding that people have the right to take issue with it. People have the right to be offended and call you out on it. But that shouldn't mean that you don't do it. It's funny, not funny, but I have a story in my collection, Monstrous, that takes place in a leper colony, and it's told from the point of view of a young woman who has leprosy. And to my mind, so much of her experience and her view of the world is dictated by her illness. I think she's much more defined by her illness than she is defined by being Filipina. Yet no one has ever called me out on trying to write from the point of view of someone who is ill. And if we had to really stay in our own lanes completely, then I would think I shouldn't have written that story. But I would like to think that it was my right to write that story, and I did the best that I could do with it. If someone has issue with it, please let me know. I'm happy to have the conversation, but I don't want the conversation to be shut down. I think to the white writer who is writing about Filipino characters, I think you should do it. If you feel compelled to do so and your heart's in the right place, go for it. But be prepared for different kinds of responses.
Obviously this is the whole
talking thing, I have my 3-year-old granddaughter is here, and I think I'm muting myself because I have a feeling any second I'll hear a peal from upstairs. Have you ever faced that kind of criticism, Daniel, about writing characters that are not
not? I think because so much of my work is not realistic. In some ways, it's
true fantasy.
there's not as much of that particular sort of criticism levied my way. But I mean, I think what to me seems really important, and you know, I think the breadth of literature and what Lysley was talking about in terms of his teaching, right? That you want to look at everything for itself, right? And that the more you read and the more diversity of reading that you do, the more you see how enormous the literary tradition is. And that, of course, there's not one way to write a novel, and or any more than there's one way to write anything at all. And part of that is that the conversation has to be eternally ongoing. It's never going to be settled, you know? And so books that seem important or not important after a time, but they're always important to somebody, you know? And a book that seems so perfectly done, you know, a book that has inspired people to take action along social grounds can also be a book that people find really reductive and really offensive and really flat. And so I think there's always this kind of thing about like, can I do this? And it's like, yeah, you can do it. And like, some people won't like it. And like, welcome to the history of literature.
Right.
You know, there's no such thing as a book no one finds objectionable.
Right.
And like certain kinds of objection, you know, get more spotlight at different times. And that's always a conversation worth having. But to kind of pretend like, oh, here's a writer who did it right. It's like, it really depends who you ask. And, you know, and the more you think about readers and the literary tradition, it's like there's no, you know, there are going to be plenty of writers who fall into the exact same category as each other who differing audiences will find differently. And I just think it's always important to remember that like literature is such an enormous tradition. People have been writing things down for so long, and it is an ongoing conversation. And I think as long as any conversation is cognizant of the history of conversations, kind of, it all feels like just and righteous and true to me.
That's great. I appreciate that. There's a couple questions here about your writing processes that I will merge. Basically, they're asking if you can share a little bit about your creative processes, what has happened to those processes during the pandemic, and if you have a schedule and that kind of thing for writing, I guess. Yeah.
I think I can probably answer for both of us that it's been a lot easier with the pandemic, right? I think the pandemic's really relaxed everybody, and everybody's doing great.
Right. Yeah. What a muse this COVID is. I don't do well when I'm bummed out. I know some writers or artists really turn to their art when they're feeling down and they think it's a kind of release, and that's wonderful. It's the opposite for me. If I'm not doing so great or feeling so great or the world seems bleak, I rarely am I inspired to work. I was on sabbatical last year with big plans and big travel plans and research plans, and the pandemic hit right before we were supposed to leave the country. And I was not productive for several months, for many months, once it hit. You know, it was like staying up until 4 a.m. reading the news and sleeping until 11. But I have to be okay with it. You know, that's my process, unfortunately. I wish I was more disciplined. I have a lot of writer friends who are really disciplined and really prolific. Sadly, I'm not one of them. Maybe one day.
I'm pretty disciplined, so there's that. But I write in a lot of coffee houses and libraries normally. And I just heard another writer say this, and I had not quite, this was something that had clearly been on my mind for a long time that I haven't quite put it, and he said, during the pandemic, I miss strangers more than I miss my friends. And that to me feels really enormous, because you can keep up relationships with relationships that you already have, and not only kind of the stranger who becomes your friend, but just kind of the world of strangers. And I really like grabbing my stuff. And I write longhand, and so I'm able to like really get offline and off screen if I go and walk to a coffee place and I have nothing with me. I have a paper and pen and maybe some little notes, or a book that I'm cribbing from or something. And I can really be alone, and I'm surrounded by strangers. I see their lives, and just an argument between two sisters that I overhear will remind me, oh, sisters, arguing, family, running late, You know, like all these things that might not occur to you when you're wandering around the house. And that part's really hard. And I must say, my hat is off to Jane and Deck, who have done such great work with Litquake this year. But it also, of course, I think we're all feeling melancholy because this is precisely the kind of talking with strangers. You know, you and I would be in some space, let's say, and we'd be talking to people in the audience, and you know, some of my friends would come and some of your friends would come, and we'd all kind of bump up together afterwards. We talk with people we don't know, and like that's the part that's been really hard on my work. I realized that the world of strangers has a really big part of me. And I've been doing these very pathetic things where I like go to a different room in my house, but I try to convince myself that I'm walking something, you know, like, okay, time to go to the living room. Because I'm not a blinked idiot, I can't really fool myself that well. I know it's the same space, but that's what I really miss. That's what's kind of upended me in terms of my work, is like the world of strangers, of bumping up against things that you don't know you're going to bump up against.
That's
right?
so interesting.
I mean, and Leslie's told, I mean, I've lost track of the number of anecdotes you've just told about, I was writing this and then like I stumbled across this and then I realized it had to be this. You know, I was watching YouTube and like this made me think this, like all that serendipity that comes from a variety of experience is really endangered right now.
Right. Are you going to like outdoor coffee shops to write, or not the same, right?
What happens when you gotta pee? That's, you know, it's like, you just can't really do it. I mean, everybody's nice and they'll like make you a little coffee and you'll sit outside and you'll be distanced or whatever, but it's like not, you know, you can't do it the way you did it. I've borrowed other people, you know, I'm actually going tomorrow to borrow someone's place in the relative country. Right, but that is mostly so it can feel like you know, it's almost like it just feels like I can order a coffee because I'm going to make my own coffee in a different kitchen. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, you know, and it's I can think of people who are suffering even more, but that's a hard part for sure.
Just to echo what Lysley said, a friend of mine who is a writer of many books said she's just been useless since the shutdown started. And for her, the enemy of creativity is not, I don't know, heartbreak or something that's really specific that you can kind of plunge into and really sort out. But this free-floating anxiety and I'm a writer too, and I've experienced the same thing, that it's just sort of hard to feel like I could do my best work when I just feel allergic to everything that's going on, and I just want to watch Friends, you know, on TV and sort of not look at the ugly stuff. But this isn't about me. Let us move on to the next question. Lysley, would you ever consider writing a sequel? Asks Stephen.
It's funny. I
from Echo Books, or is that Stephen? Yeah.
What's that?
I said, is that Stephen from Echo Books who's offering you a contract? Then yeah.
No, different.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The answer is yes. I've actually thought about I've actually thought about short stories that would serve as prequels about Maxima, because Maxima was really fun to write. So I would love one day to be able to dig deeper into Maxima's life and her story.
I want that. Do it now, please.
What advice would you give to young immigrant writers?
Oh, that's a great question. It's funny because not funny, I don't say the word funny. You know, I'll work sometimes with undergraduates who are taking my creative writing classes, and they'll say, oh, they really enjoy it, but you know, their parents would never let them pursue creative writing as a career. And I can understand that. You know, immigrant parents come here and they want their kids to secure very stable futures for themselves, and pursuing the arts doesn't really guarantee any kind of security. But I do think that an education in the arts and a life in the arts is a viable option. And if you care about it enough, if you can pair that with something a little more practical and find the time to follow both paths, then I think you should. I think I didn't, when I decided to become a writer, I didn't know that there was help along the way. I've been very fortunate to receive assistance from residencies and fellowships, and and mentoring from writers, I thought it would be this very solitary pursuit. So if you can really look at it, especially within all its sort of systematic potential, if that phrase makes sense, it's a viable path to take, but you should definitely have a backup plan as well. That never hurts.
Did you ever participate in, writing groups for sort of newish writers and that kind of thing? Or was it all sort of through academics that you found yourself coming along?
It was through school. I've never been part of a writing group. I wouldn't mind being part of a writing group. I've never found one. The times I've been invited to be part of a writing group, my projects were so raw that I really had nothing to show. Maybe if I joined the writing group, maybe this novel would have moved along more quickly. So I love the idea of a writing group, but I mostly write on my own. I live with a writer. My partner is a poet, and he reads everything I write, and I would not have been able to finish this book without him. And so I'm very lucky to have a reader at home.
So what are you both working on now? Like, when are your next books coming out? Leslie's like, it just came out. Come on.
Yeah. I'm like looking at Daniel right now to take that question first.
In recent years, I will say that many, many things that I kind of swore I would never do, I, of course, am ending up doing. And I never thought that I would write a memoir, and now I appear to be doing so.
Wow.
I know. So it's a little terrifying. It's very hard to figure out, I think in a novel anyway, I don't know, it seems like Leslie drafts were in a different way because they were so different, but I always have like a huge, shaggy, terrible draft, and then I have to kind of cut away all the parts that don't turn out to be about the story. And I'm finding that's like harder when that's your like,
Wow.
And then you think like, here's something I think about all the time. Is that crucial? like, I'm thinking about it, but like, I don't know if it's, so it's a little tight-ropey.
That's great.
And then there's a long delayed snicket book for boring reasons, but I have a snicket book coming out next year, which I'm excited about too, which is kind of the first Lemony Snicket nonfiction book, which is a little bonkers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Wow. Tightrope walking.
Beats working.
Yeah. How about you, Leslie?
I'm still trying to figure out the next book. I thought I would have it figured out over sabbatical, and that didn't happen. I actually wrote some nonfiction essays over sabbatical, which was very strange because I never, ever write about myself. So it's very strange to write about myself. So I might, there's one more that I might want to try to write and see if I can place it somewhere. But I really do want to get back to the short story. I miss it, and I've been reading short stories, so I want to go back.
Even though it's just like kissing a stranger at a party. I love that metaphor. That's so funny.
That's the only way it can happen, then I'll do it.
Right, well, you can't kiss a stranger at a party right now, right? That's like the last thing you can do. But you can write a short story, so if that actually scratches the same itch.
Right, kissing a stranger through a mask, it's just not the same thing.
No, I mean, I wouldn't know, but I assume it isn't.
I think we have time for one last question, and that is writing and putting your work out there for the world to see is such a vulnerable place to put yourself. Are you ever afraid of putting yourself out there? Who isn't, right?
A friend of mine as a writer says, if you're not scared, it's not writing. Which I tell myself when I get scared.
I get scared. I was very nervous for this book to go out in the world, and because I felt like a lot of this book was written in a panic, it was hard for me to fully understand, like with the stories, I knew what was going out. With this, I wasn't as sure. In fact, I did a radio interview a couple months ago, and the interviewer asked about a certain character. and I did not know who the interviewer was talking about. And I thought, are they talking to a different writer, or they think they're talking to a different writer? And I had to like thumb through the book to figure out who they were talking about. So it's for me, it was scary to release a book that didn't feel as familiar to me as some of the previous work. But it's always scary. I think it's always scary. It should be scary.
Yeah.
Why not?
And then there's also something I think about like the deep privilege of getting to be an artist and to deal with words on paper as part of a living. I think even no matter what kind of writing you're doing and what the shape of your career writing is, obviously what's happened to me is crazy. But I think also for most people who get to write and get to deal with words for a living, that's still a major, major privilege. And I guess because I've known some people who have had very dangerous jobs that I always look kind of askance at when people say, oh, he's really taking a risk, you know, that, oh, that writer really took a risk. And I always think like, to review, the risk is that like someone doesn't like your book. Because some people, the risk is death. Just to go over all the levels of risk. And so there's something about frightened too. It's like, yeah, it's frightening to release a book and feel vulnerable in that way. And it has to do with our emotional lives, which are really important. And like everyone understands that because we all have emotional lives. But like, you know, some people are frightened because there's no food. Right. And like, that's kind of a deeper fear, I'll just say, than like releasing new work. So I want to just acknowledge, as we talk about kind of risk and fear and danger, that we live in like such a bubble of blessing to be able to talk about this literature. And like, I feel so privileged to do it. And I love being a part of Litquake every year. And I love to, I mean, Lysley and I met once, we read together a few years ago, and but you know, we didn't get to hang out for longer than 20 seconds. And when you meet writers and when you're excited about their work, you kind of often don't get to talk shop unless you do something like this.
Right.
You know, you have to, it has to be like kind of performative to talk about the nitty gritty. And so I feel really blessed to be a part of that as well.
Me too.
Well, I wonder if we could ask Daniel. Daniel, maybe you could email me the ingredients for the Tenorio, and we can post it. No, seriously, on Facebook.
I would love that too.
Yeah.
I'll email it shortly. You'll never guess what, but I'm actually on my computer right now, so I can probably email it while faking this event.
Okay.
Good answer. Good answer. Good answer.
I can do that. But I just want
like 9 YouTube clips during this whole thing.
I wanted to thank everybody who attended tonight. There was one woman who said that she was very glad that this was online and not in person, because then she was able to attend, which is the good news. And again, thank you for attending Litquake. There's a whole bunch of more events coming up. And we're having an international lit crawl a week from Saturday, a week from tomorrow. We're going to have, I think, 7 different cities doing back to back to back, everywhere from New Zealand to England and all parts in between. So that's kind of a first for anywhere, I think, especially Litquake.
Are we the least open city?
What's that?
Are we the least open city participating?
The least open? Yeah. Oh, it's very possible.
In Wellington, they can like drink in the streets. You can kiss a stranger at a party in Wellington. I'm
guessing that is sadly true. But thank you for coming. Please vote. Stay safe, and you know, come back again and see us sometime. And thank you again to Daniel and Lysley for a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it very much. This was super.
It was fun. Thanks, you guys.
Stores everywhere.
Thank you.